It's really an honor to be able to speak this morning. It's even more of an honor to be able to speak with this group of amazingly wonderful people. And we're here today really to talk about an epidemic. And it's an epidemic that really flies under the radar and doesn't receive the attention that it deserves. And if we talk about epidemics, I come to you from Portland, Oregon, where there's measles in the air and no fluoride in the water. We think about epidemics with images like this. Our epidemic is a little different. It does lead to tragic images, and in fact, every day claims the lives of 28 kids in this country. And that would be yesterday, today, and tomorrow. 28 kids. A standard school bus in the United States holds 72 children. So in the course of a week, this epidemic is claiming 3 school buses worth of kids. Imagine if 3 school buses a week were disappearing. What we would do, how quickly we would activate, and how aggressive we would be in fixing it. And at the end of a year, those 150 school buses This is one of my favorite quotes of all time. And I think we need to recognize and call out this epidemic for what it is, as an epidemic. We do a good job, but we need to be doing better. I'm going to show you a little bit of data, and Lynn's going to build upon that, but I have this to make a point. So on the right-hand side is the list of the 10 leading causes of death taken from the Centers for Disease Control for the years 2007 to 2017, age group 0 to 1, which is on the left, and 1 to 18. And what you can see is that certainly 1 to 18 unintentional injury and is number 1, and number 5 for the younger kids. What that looks like is this, with the raw numbers. And if you break out the injury pieces, it's about 1/3 of all the deaths. So 1/3 of what kills, of all the children who die in this country between the ages of 1 and 18, look at the orange piece of pie, the one that says 13561. Those are all the kids who die from cancer. And I want you to think about how much time you spent in your training and how much time you spend at your children's hospitals, and how much the public is attuned to the issue of childhood cancer. And look at the pieces of pie that are blown out. It gets way different when we talk about infants under the age of 1. The blue piece of pie are the infants who died in their sleep. It's astonishing. When we look at kids 1 to 4 and break them out, that blue piece of pie are all the children who drowned. This is how many school buses we lose every year to those 2 causes, to sleep for infants and drowning for kids 1 to 18. Drowning remains the leading cause of death, the leading single cause of death for kids age 1 to 4, and is the second leading cause for adolescents. And with that, I'm going to introduce, having stolen some of her thunder, introduce Lynn Olson to update us a little bit more about the data, and then I'll come back. Oh, you need this. Excuse me. Here, I made you this shop glass.
Thank you. So, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this really important panel. I'm going to be brief today to provide some background information, to talk about the history of pediatrics and injury prevention very briefly, and then also to provide a broad overview on data trends. And importantly, we are making these slides available, so I'm going to go through things quickly, but we wanted you to have this as a resource to take away with you today. So, Mark has just talked about how we are looking at our history, and there is probably no more important area than injury prevention. So we know that since its earliest days, injury prevention has been foundational in pediatrics. And our history shows that you pediatricians have really built on successful partnerships, public health approaches, and persistence. I'm going to show data that indicate dramatic gains have been made over time, but it's also sobering because you will see that progress has slowed or stalled. So briefly here, the history, and it really is, I think, instructive and inspiring. It really began after World War II, when pediatrician leaders then realized that with antibiotics and vaccines, injury was now the leading cause of death in children. So the first committee was formed in 1950. And its first focus was poison. It's unimaginable now, but children were dying in the home because they had drunk the kerosene next to the stove, or the bleach or the lye underneath the sink, and medications were not secured at all. So pediatricians really built success here by listening to parents, convincing industry, partnering with the Children's Bureau and other groups to really launch major initiatives, starting in 1953 with the poison control centers. Those were really fundamentally started by pediatricians. The first was in 1953, and they spread quickly. By the end of the 50s, there were just hundreds of them around the country, addressing really important issues. And what you have here is just some selected other major milestones in what pediatricians have done. So we have here in 1968, the first policy on drowning, 1980, First Ride, Safe Ride, the TIP program, 1992, a comprehensive firearms statement, and in 1994, Back to Sleep. So a very strong history and paradigm. So, but the results of these efforts, as I will show here, efforts and partnerships, have been substantial. There have been large decreases over time in the rate of injury fatalities. I'm going to show you here, over a period of time, boys' fatal injuries declining by 2/3, girls by more than half. And you see the data here from, these are CDC vital statistics records from 1981 to 2017. The numbers mean rates per 100,000 children. And again, we're going to make all of the data available to you here. So you can see dramatic gains were made. Now I'm bringing you forward to the same data, but with the past few years. And what you see here are clearly substantial differences in injury rates and fatalities by geography. In this figure, the darker colors indicate the states with the higher rate of unintentional injury fatality. And the differential is threefold or more across these states. So clearly, as Dr. Hoffman has said, more work to be done. And that is this important panel today to talk about that with you. Recent publications this past year have really underscored this point, and I would encourage you to take a look at these. One is from the CDC, their vital statistics report, showing that injury mortality actually going upwards with children 10 to 19 years of age. The Dr. Cunningham's article in the New England Journal of Medicine similarly underscores this point and also shows how the US has higher rates for several injuries than other countries of relative similarly wealth. So really, it's important, and this information really is starting to come out. So as Dr. Hoffman said, we know that unintentional injury accounts for 1/3 of all childhood deaths. If you add suicide and homicide, injuries then account for 60% of childhood fatalities. So again here, the data, how sobering they are, with about 14,000 children dying from injury each year. And again, as Dr. Hoffman said, with motor vehicle most common, but followed quickly by suicide, homicide, poisoning, and suffocation and drowning. Very sobering. So I'm going to take a little bit of a deeper look here on a couple of topics. First of all, safe sleep. As this audience knows, there has been a lot of pediatric work in this area. In 1992, with the Policy on Infant Sleep Position from the Academy. In 1994, the Back to Sleep campaign being launched. And that was also built on extensive partnerships with the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, industry, states, communities. And what we found was, with that really targeted comprehensive effort, SIDS deaths were cut in half by 2000. But as I'll show here in a moment, this is an area where progress has stalled. We also know there are substantial disparities that remain. And we will also talk briefly about the better marker today, we believe, is looking at sudden unexpected infant death. And what do those trends look like? So this shows the relationship of the introduction of back to sleep in the 1990s, right? So this is the rate of SIDS deaths over time. So the blue bars, that's when the Academy sleep position was released. The red bars is when Back to Sleep campaign was launched. And then the green line shows what happened in terms of parents' report of babies now sleeping on their backs. So you can see the dramatic change that happened there in a very short period of time relative from 92 to 2000 with the SIDS death rate cut in half. But now thinking about sudden unexpected infant deaths or SUIDs. So given the variability and ambiguity that has arisen in terms of classifying SIDS, it's recommended now this is a better measure in order for us to track progress on time, over time. So it combines multiple causes of death determinations where, there may be some ambiguity and variation. So it is combining SIDS with accidental suffocation and unknown cause. So what do the data look like when we include that measure? Look at the top blue line here. So this would be that combined SUID measure. Again, what you can see here is that significant decline that happened after the introduction of Back to Sleep. But since then, progress has really stalled. Here again, we are showing state variation now with the SUID death rate. And again, the darker colors are indicating states with a higher rate. Again, here, there is obviously substantial geographic variation and disparities. And now a quick overview in terms of the data we know related to trends in drowning fatalities. Again, here over time, we certainly have seen some significant declines of 67% over this period of about 35 years. Again, you'll see progress has slowed or stalled. And as we also know, it is the leading cause of unintentional injury among children 1 to 4. So this figure shows the trend since '81 by gender. As you see there, the reduction in the 80s and 90s was substantial, especially for boys who began with a much higher rate than girls did. But again, what you're seeing there is a real slowdown or stalling of that reduction. Now this figure shows the same data, but now breaking it out by trends in age group. Children aged 0 to 4 are in the top dark blue line, which today is the group of children that have the highest rate of drowning fatalities, is in this youngest group. And again here, we show what the geographic variation looks like by states. And again, it's very obvious, of course, that there is significant variation across states. So I'm going to close here in order to move on to this really important panel to talk about where to go from here. And I think what you can see here, and I mean, and you know this as pediatricians, but the history really underscore what an important part of pediatric practice this has been, an important part of the academy. And the history also shows the tremendous gains that have happened. And it hasn't been done when pediatricians operate in isolation, but it's been in partnership with families, with the government, with community, with industry. And it really has been the persistence of pediatricians that has made that possible. The history also shows us that with the right strategies, accidents are not all inevitable, that the rates can be reduced. And as you can see, there's certainly more work to be done. And I will close so that you can hear with this important panel about that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. That was amazing and sobering. Wait for the slides to come up. I'll introduce the panel in a sec. But I want to ask a question first. How many people in this room, let's just say in the last week, have slept? How many people have woken up the next morning? Yeah. All right, how many people since the day you were born, with the exception of perhaps your residencies, have slept every night and woken up every morning? That's what we expect. Our exposure to sleep is massive. How many people in the last few days, and I think if you're going to answer no to this, do not raise your arm, have immersed themselves in water in the last 7 days? Again, with the exception perhaps of being post-call, pretty much every day of your life. There are people here who have swimming pools at their homes, and they're in the water every day. We're exposed constantly. And no one in this room has died in their sleep or from drowning. You may know people, you may have had patients or families who've been affected, but if you think about it relative to the exposure, think about the images of infant sleep that we surround ourselves with. And you think about your initial impression to this photo would be something along the lines of, oh. And if you go to any store in the country that sells baby equipment, you will find things like this that are not approved, that don't meet the standards. But almost everybody has them. The top right is from a commercial that played in Portland from a real estate company. And we're not blameless either. Look at that photo. Baby looks comfortable. That's great. Those neonatologists did an awesome job. And you think about what we see on TV. These are both taken from HGTV, the website. And which one of those images looks more appealing to you? Right? We're constantly reminded. Let's think about water and water that exists at people's homes or where people spend time in the water. That was for me. These are all things, quick search on Google. I know, that's a separate issue. They sell. This is how we think about water, and this is how we think about kids in water. And there's not a single image there that portrays anything that's even close to safe either. Which home would you rather have? This one or that one? You look at that picture on the left and you think, wow, that kid looks sad. Right? But that kid's alive and is likely to stay alive, because having a four-sided fence around a home pool can decrease the rate of death by about the risk of death by about 50%. But you look at that, what's more appealing? We are lucky today to have representatives of families who have lost kids in their sleep and to drowning. And I'm going to introduce each of them, and then they're going to come up and speak. I first want to introduce at the end Greg Schell, who is the chair of the Family Involvement Network, the Family Partnership Network here at the American Academy of Pediatrics. And he's here to remind us how important, how crucial our relationships with families are, and how essential it is to make sure that their voices are included in what we do, in how we develop policy, and how we advocate. So I'm going to introduce the three families now. So it's a pleasure. I'll introduce all three of them, and they're going to come up and speak, and you're going to hear their stories. So first is Bode Miller. And yes, it is that Bode Miller. He's here because his wonderful wife, Morgan, was not able to be here to join him. He's here alone. She was home taking care of the kids. They have a 5-month-old and 3 other beautiful children. Next to Bode are Nicole and Jonathan Hughes. They come to us from Bristol, Tennessee. And then to their left is Sam Hanke. Sam is a pediatric cardiologist at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Where's the Ohio contingent? Yeah. And what we're going to do is we're going to hear their stories, because when we're done, you're not going to be able to unhear these stories. And I'm going to challenge you at the end to figure out how you're going to transform your practice and your advocacy work to honor their experiences. So with that, I'll introduce Bode Miller.
Thank you. Obviously, the telling of the bigger picture, the bigger story is a longer journey, I think. But a couple relevant parts. Raised in New Hampshire, pools are not that common up there, but I grew up next to a river and had a healthy respect for water myself after falling in the water, the river on slippery rocks from when I could move around until now, actually, still. But my mother's brother drowned, so when I was 3, he was the one who introduced me to skiing. And watching our family go through that, I think, and he was an instrumental part in my early childhood, I think shocked me and sort of made me very aware of water and the risk there. So all things being equal, I would consider myself on the very extreme end of water safety or awareness of the danger there. But in June of last year, we started off with a really regular day. I actually went in the pool with all 4 of my kids in the morning about 8 o'clock and swam around and played and throwing the ball. And my daughter has a little floaty thing, and she loves that, and I take her and swim. We'd been practicing swimming, and my older 3 had all gone through swim lessons, a sort of survival swim, and then this, it's a strange character out there actually who does this one swim lesson, but they all swim with no arms. They just put their hands down and beat it with their feet to the edge, and they're all really pretty efficient swimmers. And we'd, sort of gone through our safety programs a bunch, and I was in there with all of them, and my wife was taking pictures, and it just seemed like one of those things where we felt like we had it under control. We have a fence around our entire pool, and after swimming, we all had a nice kind of late brunch. We went to Dave & Buster's for a birthday party, and they were all exhausted, and after swimming in the morning, and in the middle of the afternoon, my wife I went with my older daughter to a softball tournament, and my wife took all the other 3 kids to a friend of ours' house they're under construction, so they have no fence around their pool or hot tub in the backyard. They're not really living at their house yet. They have 2 daughters who are friends with our kids, who neither one of them swim very proficiently. And they were all in the backyard watching, and none of the kids went in the pool, went near the pool, and it was just one of those things where I think it stood out to my wife, and she actually had mentioned it, that that my daughter, who is pretty fearless, didn't go near or in the hot tub or the pool, even though they were just right there. All the parents are watching them. And my wife then went home and went to our neighbor's house, they have 2 boys also. They're like basically family. We were over there 4 or 5 nights a week, and they switched back and forth, but their boys are 6 and 10 years old, and 7 and 10 years old, and they both are on the swim team, and they'd removed their pool fence. And they're really strict. They lock their doors all the time, and we know the code to their garage so we can get in there, but really they're sort of a little bit different than us. We have our pool fence, but our house is really open all the time. And my wife was there with their 2 boys and our kids. They're all playing and messing around, and they were just in the living room chatting, and my wife had her tea and was just, at one moment, just sort of realized that Emmy hadn't been there for a minute. They were in the living room. And as she checked with the kids in the other room, she realized that the back door had been opened. I think it was probably, a couple minutes, but the reality is it's quiet and really fast. And I was, I was at this softball tournament when I got the phone call, and it's a call you don't want to get. But I think there was still that kind of like, it's probably going to be okay. Something will work out. But in this case, thank you. In this case, it didn't. And I think, obviously, being up here is not easy. But over the last months, I've really recognized what a powerful position you people are in, and I think there's an incredible opportunity here to kind of elevate that interaction, and it's just been a really tough thing to look back on and wish that I'd kind of known more or seen some of these slides or been more prepared, I guess. So I mean, I want Nicole to be able to tell her story, and I think she'll probably hold it together better than I did. And then afterwards, I think we'll have a chance to talk and discuss more. Thank you.
Thank you, Bode. I've had the chance to see Bode and Morgan with their kids and in real life, and just beyond the talents and the medals, they are devoted, good parents, and just enjoyable people to be around, and I'm so grateful to have this connection with them. So our son, Levi, his birthday is March 13th, so it was just this past Wednesday, and today my husband and I should be at Chuck E. Cheese at a birthday party, surrounded by kids wearing Paw Patrol party hats, and there should be a little boy beaming that he is finally 4, but we are not there today. We will not watch him grin with pride and embarrassment as his friends and family sing to him, to this little boy who was so loved. And I can't really find the words to explain how much I wish I was there and not here. But I also I've struggled to find the right words to explain how grateful I am to each of you to have this opportunity to be here. You fight for children every day, and our world really is better because of you, and we don't take this opportunity lightly. My husband and I, we always knew we wanted 3 kids. That was our plan, from the beginning. And we have 2 girls, Lily, and she was really Levi's greatest treasure. She was 9. She's 9, and she thinks she's 17. And Levi's Illy, as he called her, was really his greatest treasure. And she had infinite patience for his toddler antics and would leave him ring pops like hidden around the house in a scavenger hunt or snuggle with him to read books. And she has asked me often through tears, Mom, how did we not know? How did we not know he could drown when he was sitting on the couch? Our second daughter, Reese, just turned 6, and she wants to be 6 forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And Reese and Levi were only 24 months apart, and they were always together. They slept together every night, ran around squealing. I mean, they were just a package deal. And Reese, she's only in kindergarten, and she just can't process this permanent loss. And she is asked so often, why did we only get him for 3 years and not a real whole life? And Levi, he was our 3rd child. We assumed our final one. We had this boy as our caboose. And I've never seen my husband beam quite like he did on the day of Levi's ultrasound. He took the picture back to the OR, and the picture, you can imagine which one. And he was so proud. And then we had a hand on our fridge, and we had this boy. And Levi, he entered the world naked and screaming, and then that was just pretty much how he always wanted to be forever. And he had boundless energy. And and I look back and I think maybe he was just trying to fit so many years of living into just 3. He loved chocolate chip mini muffins, reading books about the giant squid, but his real all-time favorite thing to do, no matter how we begged and bribed and disciplined, was to say the word penis at the most inappropriate times, always. So he was silly, and he had the best giggle, and we will never stop missing him. My husband is a cardiothoracic anesthesiologist, and during his residency over a decade ago, we became, as you know, really, as I'm sure a lot of you have as well, really good friends with all the other families there. And we had our babies together, and we went through life together. We were super poor together, and all of those things. So after jobs took us to 6 different states, we continued our annual beach trip to Fort Morgan, Alabama every year. And this was our 7th year in this exact same house. And our first full day was Sunday, June 10th, and I have 16 photos of Levi from his final day of life. And in 14 of them, he is wearing a puddle jumper or a life jacket. He's flying a kite with his dad, he's wearing a life jacket. He's in the pool with his big sister, he's wearing a puddle jumper, because I really thought, sort of like Bode mentioned, I thought we were taking water safety seriously. And the dads always took the kids crab hunting on that first night, and they had these matching yellow custom shirts. And when I put Levi's on him, it was the first year that he really understood what was going on. And he was so happy to be a big kid. And he said, Mom, this isn't my pajama shirt. This is my crab hunting shirt. And, I think back, and I don't know how we lost him before the crab hunting trip even started. So we waited for it to get dark, and we kind of all hung out in the kitchen. We were finished eating. I wasn't on my phone. I wasn't drinking. I gave Levi, there were a small plate of brownies. I gave him half of a brownie, put it in his bowl, and I put the other half of the brownie in my mouth. And I have relived the next few seconds on repeat over and over for the last 9 months. And I don't know what. I turned to close a bag of Cheetos. He was sitting on the couch wearing khaki shorts, surrounded by friends. Both parents were in the room. There were 10 adults in the room. Somehow, 1 minute, I was closing a bag of Cheetos, finishing a brownie, and the next, I had walked out onto the balcony. I didn't even know he was missing. That's how quickly it happened. And somehow he got out the doors, out of a room full of people, and I looked over the balcony, and a bright spot of yellow pierced my soul, and it was Levi at the bottom of the pool. And at first I was confused. I thought, but he's on the couch. Like, we weren't even swimming. He's wearing khaki shorts. And then, of course, I panicked and banged on the glass doors, screaming, and sprinted down the spiral staircase. And the other half of the brownie was still in my mouth. And I know I'm not a doctor. I don't have the statistics, but I can tell you, I split a small brownie with him. I hadn't finished it before I had to pull him out of the pool. That is how fast it happens. By the time we got him out, we had 6 physicians, 5 cardiothoracic anesthesiologists, and 1 ophthalmologist. And they were all there by the side of the pool, including my husband. And I knew, I don't know how, but I knew Levi was dying. But I had this tiny flicker of hope, and I just latched onto my husband. this man who never lost his cool, who deals with life and death every day. And I remember thinking, oh, if he's gonna be okay, then I'll know. And I watched him perform CPR on his only son, on his namesake, until a friend pulled him away. And then I watched in slow motion as the strongest man I'll ever know threw his hat into the air and pleaded to the heavens, someone call 911. And I knew at that moment we would never get Levi back. And we both fell to our knees in desperation, pleading to change places with this boy who had so much life to live, and we had somehow failed to protect. Our friends even fully intubated him. You know, we think about the response, which is important, but they fully intubated him. He regained a pulse. It was airlifted, but we never got him back. And you think, especially as a physician family, this isn't going to happen to you. But the reality is, it's painful to admit, that people think drowning happens to neglectful parents who don't watch their kids when they're swimming. And I know that's what I thought. But the stigma around drowning is the greatest threat to the prevention efforts. And my husband and I, we are attentive, educated parents. He is an airway expert. I am probably the mom that all of you dread, because I come in with my stacks of parenting books and all of my questions and thoughts. And we had never heard the truth about drowning. And 1 week after Levi died, to the day, we discovered the statistics. And it was like our hearts shattered all over again. And we just thought this information had been compiled, but it never reached us. I remember almost like searching my house, like, it's gotta be here. I've just misplaced it. Surely, surely. In 9 years of parenting, I've heard this, but there was no information. Drowning is an afterthought in our culture, and the harsh reality is that Levi's death rests on us. We were in the room, he got out. I mean, we did not keep him safe, but I just wish I'd known what we were up against before June 10th. And my husband offered me a simple yet powerful bit of insight, and when he was playing devil's advocate, you know, Nicole, people think kids can't breathe underwater, like what else is there to know? And I get it, that's what I also thought. We almost smugly view drowning as some sort of punishment for parents too neglectful to watch their kids. We find the loophole rather than facing the fear that this could be us. But is a mother being neglectful when her 3-year-old son is sitting on a couch eating Cheetos? When she turns to close a Cheeto bag, is it a 3-year-old's fault when we haven't given him the skills to protect himself? The statistics on drowning are staggering, as we saw, but drowning is not just a statistic. It is sitting on a couch holding your husband's hand as he tells your 5- and 9-year-old daughters that their baby brother will not be coming home. Drowning is not something that happens to other people. It happens to the physician who is also the dad that coaches the softball teams. It happens to his wife who is the teacher and the Girl Scout troop leader. It happens to parents who love their children. Nearly 1,000 kids drowned in 2017, but drowning is not a number. Drowning is when you spent months debating whether your son would start t-ball or soccer first, and having only minutes to choose whether you will cremate or bury his tiny body. In 1973, 8 years before I was born, my 2-year-old cousin Jeffrey drowned. There was a playground, and a few yards past it was a ditch, and it had filled with rainwater. He slipped away for just a minute, fell in and drowned. And I know you're thinking, well, you knew about water. How can you say you didn't? But because he drowned and nobody was talking about it, it almost just indirectly reinforced to me that drowning doesn't really happen to kids. But because of Jeffrey, my family did take water safety seriously, and my daughters could both swim by age 3. And I'm sure the regret is palpable in my voice. In April of 2018, just 6 weeks before I would pull my son off the bottom of the pool, my husband and I stood in our kitchen and read the recommendations for toddlers in swimming and decided to not enroll Levi until he was 4. He will never turn 4 years old. Just weeks after losing him, this confusion that I felt when I saw him in the pool hadn't dissipated, and I was so desperate to spread awareness. And because with my husband being a physician and my high regard for our own pediatrician, I really knew that the medical community was the answer. Pediatricians set the topics for our conversations as parents, and even my physician husband always would say, what did our pediatrician say? Every time would default to his advice, because we just trust you. You are gods to us. You really are. And I reached out to the AAP in July, and within days, hope and action were just already stirring. And when the executive director from Arkansas, Amy Ollinghouse, read my email and called me, she spoke as both a mom and as a chapter executive director. And from that first interaction really set the tone of commitment and family engagement. And since then, we've had the chance to work closely with Mark Del Monte, Susan Martin, Dr. Kraft, and of course, Dr. Hoffman. And the devotion of so many people at the AAP has really been invaluable. And it sounds so trivial, but thank you for being nice and wanting to hear this, being willing to hear this. And that's why we are here, because we care about our children in the future. As my husband so aptly said, drowning doesn't happen to the parents, it happens to the child. Heartache and regret will be our lifelong companions, but this tragedy isn't about us. It's about Levi, it's about Emmy, it's about every child who had parents who didn't know how to protect them. And often I think of Levi's final seconds in the water, and I never knew 3 tiny words could inflict such pain. Was he scared? In 1973, my Aunt Paula buried my cousin Jeffrey 45 years ago. She told me that as Levi was being airlifted, she knew he would be okay because the same tragedy would never happen twice to our family. But it did, and Levi's funeral fell on the same day as Jeffrey's birthday. 45 years. And drowning is still a silent epidemic that continues to march onward. My husband and I had our final moments to say goodbye to Levi in the hospital room. We kissed him. We brushed his hair back. We told him we loved him in an endless stream. We love you, we love you, we love you, we love you. We looked at this baby we had brought into the world, and we were watching be snatched away. And right before we walked out of the hospital room without him, the very last words I said to my son were, "I'm so sorry. I didn't even know how to protect you." And the last 3 words I said were, "I'm going to fix this." And it will get fixed. It is getting fixed, but I was wrong, because it won't be me at all. It will be this army of people, all of you who are here listening, who will go back and create change and help fix this for the future. I'm speaking for every child who fell into the water and tried to scream, but nobody could hear them. For every child who thought water was fun. We have the chance to save sons and daughters, grandchildren, nieces and nephews. We cannot wait another 45 years. This is it. It's time to change the future, to leave the legacy, to stop the epidemic. We can fix this for our children. Thank you. And I want to thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. And on this note of, thank you. Sorry. And on this note of breaking stigmas, I want to, I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Sam Hanke to share his story. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole and Bode. I should have gone first. That was incredibly powerful, and being a pediatrician and pediatric cardiologist, it's moving me, and I hope you feel that too. And I hope the next few minutes sharing my story can give the weight to the reality that families like me experience waking up to a dead baby. As Dr. Hoffman mentioned, and thank you so much for organizing this and for all of you guys for being here, I'm a pediatrician and a pediatric cardiologist. I've been in the Midwest my whole life, from Louisville, Kentucky, and did my residency and chief residency at Cincinnati Children's Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I've been blessed to be there for my fellowship in cardiology and on faculty, in addition to being the chief patient experience officer for the last year. I'm pretty comfortable speaking to big rooms. I'm pretty comfortable speaking to pediatricians. I did it hundreds of times before. I'm not comfortable here. I'm not comfortable here because I have to share the worst day of my life over and over and over again. But I do it because I want there to be a story to this tragedy. I want there to be face to this tragedy, because all too often, these babies that die every 3 hours in America die without a voice. And I think it is our job as pediatricians, and my job as a pediatrician, to give a voice to this tragedy. And I hope that you walk away from this discussion today sharing my story, sharing Charlie's story, sharing everyone's story that you're hearing, to make these numbers, which are so important to hear, but to make them real. My wife and I wanted a bunch of kids. She's a kindergarten teacher, and I obviously trained to be a pediatrician, and we used to joke that it would be a bad reflection on our professional expertise should anything bad happen to our children. It was in April 2010 that we welcomed Charlie into this world, and as you can see from these beautiful pictures, he was perfect. He was 7 pounds, 11 ounces, 21 inches. He was the same height and weight as I was, and he brought such joy to our life and such life to our joy. We were a very normal family. Read books to him, had bath time, really starting to settle into the routine as brand new parents and all the joys that come along with it. My wife knew the importance of breastfeeding and really was committed and passionate to breastfeeding. In general, he took to it pretty quickly. She was really hitting the rhythm in stride. I went back to work and as chief resident and came home one day, and he was a little bit more fussy throughout the day. And my wife was getting tired. 3 weeks in, it gets exhausting. So I said, get some sleep in your bed tonight. I'll watch Charlie. Charlie had his own crib. We put him on his back. I obviously learned about anticipatory guidance, and I taught families about anticipatory guidance, and if you were to ask me, I said Charlie slept on his back. The safe to sleep recommendations weren't out by then, but we were following what I told people and what I knew was the safest thing to do. I wasn't putting Charlie to sleep, I was holding Charlie. I was sitting on the couch, holding him, watching ESPN, and I fell asleep. Sometime later, I'm not sure how long it was, Maura woke up saying it's time to feed him. She felt the urge. I looked down in a panic, and Charlie was lifeless. And I panicked. My doctor instincts kicked in. I did CPR on my own child, and I couldn't save him. Charlie was gone forever, and life as I knew it has been completely changed. The career I thought I would have within pediatrics, within pediatric cardiology, brought on a whole new light. I was blessed to have a wonderful pediatrician watching over us. Chris Bowling from Pediatric Associates in Northern Kentucky came to our house and talked to us. He sat down with us. He told us that Charlie died from SIDS. He reassured us that there was nothing that could have been done. He did that to protect me. Because I know there's something that can be done. And I'm here in an injury prevention session because these are preventable deaths. These are no longer deaths that occur for unknown reasons because of unknown causes. These are deaths because these babies are not being put to sleep in safe positions all the time. Because every family believes that they're an exception to the rule. Because all of our pediatricians from time to time say, well, this is really hard, we might want to change the way we message this. And we give parents to be an excuse. And for some reason, what I did, which I know isn't that exceptional, hundreds of fathers fall asleep with their babies every single day, resulted in me losing my child. This is a cross I'm going to carry for the rest of my life, and I, like the Millers and the Hugheses, refuse to just sit quietly and let other babies die and other children die every single day because of this reality. I know the role of the Academy is really a critical one, and as a fellow of the Academy, I really applaud all the efforts and want to be a part of the solution. I also know that it takes more than what we're doing to actually impact the lives of these children and save these lives. The statistics that Lynn showed were sobering. They were amazing in the 80s, they were amazing in the 90s, but we haven't done anything since then. These babies keep dying. We have to do something different. And that's why I'm here today. I think we need to change the way we look at this. I think we need to change the way that we message this. And it takes partnerships from parents, it takes partnerships from pediatricians, it takes the best evidence that makes what we say different than what some person on the internet says. That it takes the respect that we've gained as a career, as a field for pediatricians over decades, and we just need to shout it from the rooftops and partners with families to make a difference. And I hope that from this, and from your roles and leaderships in your districts and in your hospitals and in your practices, that we can take this and go to action, and that's why I'm here today. I didn't wait 8 years, Charlie had been 9 in April, to do something. My wife and I couldn't wait. We couldn't talk about it like you guys so elegantly talked about it for about a year, 2 years. But on what would have been Charlie's first birthday, we established Charlie's Kids Foundation. Not really knowing exactly what we wanted to do, but we wanted to remember Charlie because his life was not about 3 weeks. There's something more about his life. But we also wanted it to be a solution. We wanted to drive action. And my wife's a kindergarten teacher, and she says, let's use a board book. Let's use a children's book. I was a pediatrician, and at this time, the Safe Sleep recommendations came out from the SIDS task force in 2011. And we said, let's make this information more approachable to families. And that was the impetus behind this book, which takes these recommendations and distills them down into a simple do's and don'ts list. The inside of the book is a children's board book that shares the story of safe sleep, but without the do's and don'ts quite telling. I'm proud to say that about 5 years later, we've distributed over 3 million copies of this book across the country, and we think it's making a difference. We know it's remembering Charlie, and in some places, we're seeing fewer deaths when these books are being distributed. As a parent, I think nothing more in life to be proud of our children, and to have this legacy of Charlie in all these households is something that I'm proud of as a father, and helps to bring me some relief to the tragedy that I live every day. And I hope that we can take these types of approaches and all these other ideas that haven't even been invented to connect with families in new ways, to have an impact on our families, and to drive home that these behaviors, whether they're the water safety behaviors, whether they're gun violence behaviors, gun safety, any injury prevention behavior, there has to be a persistent effort toward doing better and doing more. So that's why I'm here. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Hoffman, and I think we have some questions. And I just want to thank everyone for listening to my story, for taking my story home with you, to finding other families that have been impacted in your communities and share their stories. 3,500 babies a year is way too many. We need to do better. Thank you.
So what we're going to do now is we're just going to have a conversation. And we're going to talk for a little while. We have some questions that we've discussed to help bring out some points that we felt were important. And then we're going to have an opportunity for you to ask questions. Before we go forward, I just have to acknowledge the courage and the grace of everybody who just shared those stories. That was incredibly difficult. But everybody here knows that as advocates for kids, our stock in trade is the science. That's what people expect. We walk into a room, they know that we're the experts in child health. The thing that has been so transformational for me in this process are the relationships. And those relationships enable us to share stories. And I think we all have been profoundly affected by those stories. So I want to start out with questions. And I'll ask Bode to answer first, if that's okay. And I think you both you and Nicole alluded to some of this, but you have a room full of leaders in pediatrics. What do you want us to know? How can we partner? What can we do differently? How can we take this forward to honor your kids?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, as I sort of set up there, I just didn't really know. I thought I knew, I thought I had information, and I think Dr. Ball is here. I said hi to him on my way in, I've been blessed with fantastic pediatricians, and there's certainly no blame here. It's not even a part of the conversation, but we had never had a conversation about water safety or drowning. And my thought was, we want to drive parents and we want to drive the conversation with a sort of a different level of intensity, but also make it so that moms and dads, I'm more or less a stay-at-home dad as well. We're fortunate enough that we can do that with my wife and I both being there. So I'm privy to a lot of these conversations between Southern California moms, where I'm one of the only dads who's there. And a lot of those conversations are not what I would like them to be, not only because they don't include meaningful things in a lot of cases, but because I think that's the level that I believe this conversation needs to be at. It should be, it should be a part of it. Is these two issues, but injury prevention in general should be in that conversation, and it's just not. And I believe that it can be assisted by you guys. It can be assisted by the pediatricians of just that little instigative, part of the conversation. Hey, talk to your friends about it. See what they do. Safe sleep is hard, and what swim lessons might work for you at what time, and what's your pool safety plan? What's your water safety plan? Talk to your friends about it. And I just think we're, as parents in this position, we're in a very powerful place because people can understand it's actually real for us, and when we talk about it, it has an impact. But I do think there's a part of it that's also connected to the pediatric world, because as we said, we rely on the pediatricians to give us that advice too, and I think it needs to come from both directions. We want to create a situation where the parents are coming in saying, what's your advice on this, or what's the situation with drowning? But I also feel like it's helpful if the pediatricians are starting with number one. What's the number one thing? When you have a new baby, what are your concerns about your kids? Sure, it's these crazy things, and you don't want to call parents crazy, but a lot of our concerns are crazy. And then here's the things that are statistically not crazy. These are your top things you need to be concerned about. And I think, for me, that really struck home after something like this happened. And like I said, I consider myself pretty solid in terms of looking at risk and analyzing stuff, and I think that part is very commonly glossed over for parents.
Thanks. Nicole?
Bode said it pretty well. I agree. I think that, that we don't want this. We know there's a lot you have to cover, in a well-child visit, but, and one thing, that Bode even mentioned last night is just making it more of like a question with the parents and saying, what are your concerns? What do you think? And then sort of saying, well, here's what you really should be, because then there's ownership. I know when I go to a well-child visit, I have my other kids, and I'm trying to get them to stop talking so I can hear the dog. I know all the things that are going on in one. But I do think it's a great place to start the conversation on just this. Levi turned 3. He had his well-child visit in April, and he was a boy right in that age range. And water safety, and I love our pediatrician, and water safety never came up, but we did talk about, ounces of milk, and if he could drink out of a cup, and all of those things. And I sure wish I could go back and take that 60 seconds away and replace it with, do you have a water safety plan? Does he know how to swim? And just because we really do, we just love our pediatricians. Thank you, we really do. You guys are wonderful, and that's what I think we really want to convey the most, is we believe in you. Okay, try to pass it.
You have a very You have a very powerful role. You have a powerful forum, and I tell the story. And bear with me. I don't mean this to come up with. I hold 2 board certifications, fellow American Society of Anesthesiology, and if our kid spikes a temp to 101, we have to take him to a real doctor.
That's exactly right. I don't even ask him.
Yeah, can you take the kids to the real doctor? decide that this is what you want to do, you want to prevent death. I know it's, for lack of a better term, it's not sexy. It's not, rushing in and criking and cutting a hole in somebody's neck and saving the day. But if you go your entire career without having to come out to the waiting room and give the news to us, I'd call that a win. So, but anyhow, I think there's a conversation to be had. I think if the American Academy of Pediatrics is willing to partner with us and with other families, I think a dramatic impact can be made. I think this is low-hanging fruit, and we appreciate all of your time and effort so far, and we hope that we drive a conversation in your office every day, in the office of all the pediatricians that you represent, about injury prevention.
Thank you. Before I ask Sam to answer that question, I just want to piggyback, because I think you opened a door about the relationship between us as pediatricians, between our professional organization and families. And I want to give Greg a chance to comment.
Well, first of all, I just have to thank you for being here, because this day is a perfect example of education and collaboration between pediatricians and families. And really, the courage that you've shown today is unbelievable to me. Losing a child is beyond comprehension, and for you to come and talk about that is just beyond what I can understand. So thank you. Thank you. Bode, you brought up a really interesting point. Different family members have different needs. And it's interesting that you're getting together with a group of moms, oftentimes being the only dad, and you sense this isn't exactly the conversation that I wanted to have. And that's just one element of families. When big things happen in families, each family member has unique needs then. And that's for siblings, that's oftentimes for grandparents, it can echo into friends and extended family. So finding resources for that is sometimes difficult. But we do have two flagship organizations in the United States that you probably could access, and maybe already have accessed often. Family Voices, obviously, and then Family to Family. And then there's a huge array of community groups that are wonderful allies in this kind of work that could benefit both pediatricians and benefit families. And getting to know some of those doesn't take a lot of work. You can Google that. You can ask parents about what has been useful to them, and they are more than eager to be allies with you. So I'll stop my comments, but I'm just encouraging you. These folks are just such wonderful examples of how powerful stories, experiences can be that fuel change, and taking their fuel, although it's heartbreaking fuel, make change so that we don't have this happen again.
Thanks.
Yeah, just to build off of that, I think as pediatricians, one of the key things that we can do here is to use these stories as a fuel, not for fear. And too often the stories are being used for fear. And we need to keep the joy of being a parent present while still addressing the realities of this. So I think one of the primary things that I hope we can do as pediatricians is to have conversations with families that are focused on change and solutions, not about driving up fear and despair. And along those lines, what I've experienced over the last 8 years is that sometimes to either negate that fear or to avoid conflict, as pediatricians, we negotiate on what the recommendations are and on what the evidence says. I've been blessed to have 2 rainbow babies after Charlie, and Owen was our first that we had. He's almost 8 now, he's 7.5. And on one of his follow-up visits, it wasn't with our normal pediatrician, we talked about safe sleep, and they said, well, it's really not that important. You can do this, like this. Same practice. My family, and it wasn't even me pushing him to find an alternative. It was a lack of awareness and understanding of this. And I think as pediatricians, we have to be leaders ourselves in how we promote this, and most importantly, how we provide solutions that are aligned with the recommendations that have come out of the AAP. But we know all too often, by show of hands, how many in here have actually fallen asleep with their baby on a couch or a bed? Okay. And that's along with what the evidence has showed. We don't do the best job practicing what we preach. But how many of them did it intentionally because they felt like it was the safest? How many did it because it's hard to follow these recommendations every time, right? And I think our primary role as pediatricians is to help families through the difficulty of actually following what we say they should do. We have a unique role to touch families' lives, not in the hospital. I mean, that's really important where we have these our newborn visits and after delivery, tell them what they should do. But we have a really rare window of time within the first several months of life to talk to families about how they're actually dealing with the reality of safe sleep and providing solutions that help them put their baby to sleep safely, to address the fatigue, to really address sleep efficacy as a way and as a solution. But at the same time, don't say, well, here's an unsafe way of doing it because it's hard. It's the equivalent of saying, I know it's hard to put a kid in a car seat every time, so if you're not going that far down the road, it's okay. It sounds crazy to say that, but that's what we're doing day in and day out across America, and our parents are getting conflicting messages that they can't follow through. And so to answer your question in short, I would say we have to be sure that we don't negotiate, but we have a meaningful conversation in identifying what the barriers are and working through evidence-based solutions to those barriers.
Nicole, you wanted to comment?
Oh, I was on the next one.
Okay, that's fine. All right, so I'll piggyback on that our role as advocates, and as Jerry pointed out, I'm a recovering residency program director. Over the course of the last 20 years, have read 7,000 plus personal statements, and I don't ever remember a personal statement that didn't focus on why someone wanted to become a pediatrician, which was to do great things for kids, to be that advocate. I have yet to read one that said, I really love working on EPIC. Our advocacy happens at multiple levels. There's the individual advocacy that we practice in the course of our clinical work. And in a good day or a bad day, depending on how you want to look at that, that's 20, 30, 40 families. And it's low level in terms of what you're able to accomplish. We can work at systems level, whether it's your practice, whether it's your hospital, whether it's your community, and you can have a broader impact. It takes more work. And then moving up to the level of policy around legislation at municipal, state, federal levels. Based on your experiences and what we've been able to work on together, how has your work had impact so far, and how do you feel like we go forward? And I'll open it up to one of you guys first. You can decide who wants to go first.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I was really going to piggyback on what you were saying a minute ago about the different organizations that are out there, and I know with water safety and drowning, there are so many nonprofits that have been putting in years of work, and they are passionate and devoted, and most of them, I will say not all, but most of them do use the evidence-based and the research, and so a really easy starting point, like to continue this, is just to connect with a nonprofit in your state or in your area that's really kind of already done a lot of the work, and then you're not reinventing the wheel, you're just connecting with them, and they will be thrilled to have a chance to connect. I mean, this is their life's mission now, is to spread water safety, and to have a chance to do it through a platform, like through the AAP or through your state chapter. I know they would just be, I think, a really easy but very meaningful sort of next step. And I've actually connected with a lot of these families, and so I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but anyway, if you want to reach out to me, I will help you find someone in your area I would be happy to do that, to connect you with, a nonprofit or a family or an organization in your state or in your area that's already working on water safety and drowning, and just get that conversation going. And then I think it will just sort of take off, from there. And then they've done a lot of the work, really, but they would love to partner with you. So that is important for me to say. Can I give him my anyway, contact me. I will help in that area.
Or if there's any question, you have my email. You can contact me, and I will get you in touch with Nicole. We'll figure that out.
The family engagement part, I think, is key, and I think that's a really easy next step to actually impact change. Now you know the stories, you feel like it's important, hopefully, and then to take that next step. It's an easy next step.
Yeah, I think the partnership, it's been really encouraging, I think, for me and my wife and even our extended family to sort of integrate into the AAP and really be heard, I believe. And I think one of the risks, or one of the things that we sort of talked about in our less emotional, less crazy moments was, are we going to end up being the crazy parents now who, like, that's all they talk about, or they're hyper vigilant about one thing and then neglect everything else. And I think we did fall into that category of kind of being like, it's not going to happen to us, right? I mean, that's the one thing that really we took away from this, was like, we were vigilant and we consider ourselves good parents. We tried to pay attention. We read lots of stuff. We have great pediatricians, and we weren't neglectful in any way, but yet we did fall into that category of, like, we knew things happened, but they didn't happen to us. And in California, you drive around, you see people, almost every person you go by in your car is texting or on their phone. And we certainly had not, whether neglectfully or whatever, had not clicked our kids into their car seats because we were just going around the corner. And we would have conversations about those things, but we sort of felt like part of this collaboration with the AAP is to validate the intensity that I think we have now as parents who have really ultimately paid a pretty huge price for this perspective that we have. And we don't want to have that be just us being the crazy parents who have gone through something really bad. And we want it to be echoed by the AAP. We want to have, when parents come in and say, hey, my friends lost their kid, or we had this conversation about water safety, what do you think? That the pediatrician is on the same page of, this is the real deal. This is your number one cause of death for kids 1 to 4, and here's what you should be thinking about. Here's, instead of like, as you said, yeah, it's true, it does happen, but probably not to you. And not that a pediatrician would say that, but the implications are there with the way that the issues have been addressed in the past. And I think that's really my hope. And it's never malicious. And like I said, we love our pediatricians, and we know it's not done that way. It's as was alluded to, it's kind of this, like, you don't want to scare the crap out of a parent. They're already going through enough. It's like, there's, and it's a very tricky balance and fine line to walk. But I think we want to see that. I think all of us in this room, you guys included, want to see that done. Where, look, here's what it is. Do it the way we recommend, and try your best. And there's always going to be moments where it doesn't work because it is very difficult. But sticking to that kind of hard line, and I think having parents who have gone through it who can share firsthand. I know that my intensity around the sleeping of my 5-month-old has changed since we started this conversation. It really has. There was a little bit of wiggle room there in my mind, and it became less or none, even though I'm sure situations still happen, but it's less or none now. And same with, I just wanted to readdress all those issues across our lives. Like, are we still in that category of, like, it's not going to happen to us? Is texting and driving, like, yeah, sure, everyone else, sure, statistics are scary as crap, but it's probably not going to happen when I'm just driving this far and my wife's texting me about picking up stuff from the store. It's like, that to me is where this collaboration and relationship really benefits, is you guys being able to echo the intensity and keeping that intensity high enough so that when I have these conversations with the moms of Orange County, I can say, talk to your pediatrician about it, and they're going to tell you exactly what I'm saying, and that everybody's on the same page. I think ultimately these are things that really can be changed and switched, but that team effort there, I think, is critical.
Excellent.
I think from an advocacy standpoint, a unified message And I think I've never met a pediatrician who said, I don't care about kids. And I think when you encounter these nonprofits, you'll find that the message is fairly unified. You're not that far apart. And I think Bode hit the nail on the head when he said we want it validated. If this group decides that water safety is an issue, that injury prevention is the issue to discuss, it's validated. You're the experts. It's you, ladies and gentlemen, that make that decision about what gets validated. So, and I think the one other thing I wanted to add that's somewhat germane is you've heard 3 anecdotes, you heard 3 stories. But one time at the American Society of Anesthesiology National Conference, our speaker was the co-pilot with Captain Sully, who put it down in the Hudson, you know. And that's not what this is. This is how not to get your bags lost. This is happening every day. Please don't, and I know you don't, I'm not insulting anyone's intelligence, please don't think that we are unique, because unfortunately we are not. We are in the majority. So I think if you can look at it through that lens, you can unify and have one message going forward, and it will make an impact. Sell yourself short. It'll make a difference.
Yeah, I echo all those statements, and I think to put my systems thinking nerd hat on, you know, we often hear, you've probably heard the quote that a system's perfectly designed to get the result that it gets, and right now our system and how we're approaching advocacy for injury prevention is getting results that are unacceptable, and I think we have to take an approach that fundamentally changes the way that we look at this. Advocacy, awareness, and education is foundational to this approach, and I think we have a lot of work to do, and it's the right place to start, but I also think it's just the first place to start. We are stressed out. We have only so much time in our visits with our families, and the advocacy and education needs to be reinforced there, but it should be a reinforcement and not a new idea. We, as I think an academy, needs to approach how we take the evidence-based policy statements that we have and make them relatable to the masses. That's what we do in Charlie's Kids Foundation, is to take the recommendations and make it relatable. I've been blessed to get to know Rachel Moon, Michael Goodstein, and many of the people on the task force for SIDS and Safe Sleep, and have such great respect for the passion and direction and expertise that they bring to it. We are doing everything we can to try to get this message out there. But we have to reach outside of the confines of how we think about pediatrics in a physical, face-to-face encounter, and provide this advocacy and education in a different way. And this is going to require, I think, expertise outside of us as physicians to help make this message relatable. And I think those are some of the foundational things that have to happen. But building back on what I was saying with the previous question, if we then go in and provide conflicting information as pediatricians, it's going to completely negate all that work. So I think it's thinking about it as a system. Those two things have to happen in coordination, and I think the AAP is the right place to coordinate those efforts.
That's awesome. I introduced some of the statistics. I think Lynn hammered it home. I think one of the ugly secrets about child injury is the issue of classification of injury and ultimately death. And I know in the sleep realm, it's a huge issue. I know it's also an issue across other spectra, and I wanted Bode to share a little bit of his experience with the classification of Emmy's death.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the statistics, as I said, even from your guys' perspective, I know that if we'd had the conversation and Dr. Ball had said, you know, the number one likely cause of, or the number one cause of death for kids, and you had 2 kids at the time, I had 2 kids in that range, is drowning, I think that would have triggered something. But my daughter ended up not being classified as drowning because she survived for over 24 hours after the incident happened. So hers was, you know, cardiac failure or something else. It was classified as. And you know, the scary thing about that is when you see these statistics and the number of school buses and all that stuff, it breaks your heart. But the reality is most kids who are drowning, or maybe not most, but a significant number of kids aren't even on that statistic. It's not going to get better if the classification is correct, because every child who drowns and is classified as drowning died of drowning. And a huge number of kids who drowned and died because of the drowning, or aren't classified as drowning, they're classified as other things. So that pie chart and the number of school buses is even much scarier. So I think one of the things that we've talked about at these different tiers of impact that we can have is, parents do have a voice, and people, the general public, but you guys are kind of in that next tier of impact because you have a sphere underneath you that you have a lot of influence over and communication with, and because of your expertise and your knowledge and experience, you can really affect that level change as well. And I think as pediatricians, you want to know, as parents do, you want to know that the information is accurate and right and it's not being misrepresented. And as a parent, I think that's, as trivial and weird as it sounds, it's frustrating to have that be another issue on top of all these other things, is that it's not even recognized as what it was, and the statistics are, because in some way it sort of puts the confusion back into the equation of like, we didn't really know, and yet so what, she didn't drown because she's not classified as dying of drowning? It's like, to me, that piece of this is really a critical part to the future and to the evolution of how the statistics are portrayed, how parents interpret them, and how you guys can facilitate that communication, is that you have to get the minutia away and just like clarify, because I do think that, when the numbers are actually accurate, it's going to be even more terrifying or more scary and more heartbreaking. And I think, unfortunately, we, as parents, you lose your kid, you lose them regardless. But I think from a policy standpoint, you want to know what the cause is. You want that to be accurate so that you can implement the right policy changes. And that, again, I see that as a huge collaboration as well. I know the parents have a responsibility, but I also know that you guys have a very powerful position in that.
Yeah. Do you want to speak to the?
Yeah, I'll speak to that briefly. It's certainly a huge issue in the sleep-related death world. We don't really know what to call it. We call it SIDS, sleep-related death, ASSB, unknown cause, cot death. We call it all sorts of different things. On top of that, we're trying to promote a prevention behavior that, if you don't follow it every single time, doesn't result in death every single time. So you have a behavior that is linked to a really muddy term that is also now associated with diagnostic shifts that we've seen within our child fatality death reviews groups and from our coroner's offices, creates this kind of mishmash of, well, what is it? And the parents, as a result, just say, well, I'm not going to do anything because it's not clear. And in fact, when I'll share our story online and other things, if you look at the comments, there's such a pervasive misunderstanding about what these deaths are from. Some of this is related on our historical knowledge around SIDS and the belief that these are not preventable for the majority of them. And some of that's because we haven't really made that link between the behavior of safe sleep and the outcomes of SIDS, ASSB, unknown cause, or SUID. And so that entire milieu has created a fair bit of uncertainty that then, when it comes to a head in your offices, I think really puts you behind the 8 ball. And I think some of that is what we can do as pediatricians. Other of that is things that the CDC and our coroner colleagues and medical examiner colleagues and they're working on it, are trying to create more clarity about how we are classifying these deaths, more importantly about what are the factors that are present at the time that these deaths occur, so we can have a better understanding, a real good understanding what the risks are, and then message it to our families even clearer.
That's awesome. And I know that the Committee on Child Death Review, see Eric Batra there, has been very involved in this and will continue to be going forward. So we've got about a half an hour left. I want to give the opportunity for you to ask questions. We'll take about 20 minutes, and then I'll take the last 10 minutes. What I would like, if you don't mind, we have the microphones over there. Please.
Hi, thank you so much for your stories. My name is Cora Bruner. I'm from Seattle. My kids were 5, 7, and 9. They were swimming with their dad in Lake Washington in Seattle, open water swimming. And this young boy, 12-year-old Jabril, it was on June 10th, 2004, was playing in the shallow part of the lake, and he looked like he couldn't swim, but he saw my kids jumping off the dock with their dad, The lifeguards had finished about half an hour before. He started walking towards the dock, and very obviously he couldn't swim. So my kid's dad, my kids kept waving to him, "Don't come out here." And he kept coming. And then he started swimming and then sunk. And my kid's dad swam to the bottom like 20 times and got him, pulled him up on the dock, did CPR in front of my kids, who were also trying to help this poor young boy. His mother was sitting on the beach, couldn't speak a word of English. She was from Somalia. And he died. And so my question to you, and as you bring these stories up, so many things roil in my head, is about the inequity too. So my kid's dad and I went to this family's house after he died to just be with his family. And I asked the mom, did anyone ever talk to you about water safety with an interpreter? And she said no. And I'm not sure if that's because of the language barrier, inequity, if the care, I don't know. But there's that piece too, right? There's just, So that's my question really, is about making sure that the people who have died are also, and being accused of being neglectful, and how did you let this kid out on the lake, and all of this stigma around her because she couldn't speak English, she was from Somalia. So that's my question, is on the programs that you're doing, and we have Linda Kwan, I'm sure you know her water safety initiatives in the Northwest, and she's very outspoken about this too, but my question is about all the programs that are out there, are just making sure that there's equity in terms of who we're trying to reach. Thank you.
Thank you, Cora. Outside of 1 to 4-year-olds, the second highest risk group are adolescent males, and there's an incredible disparity in terms of racial and ethnic background. And a lot of it gets, the other thing that we really haven't had a chance to discuss today is the fact that, where kids drown in the Pacific Northwest and how they drown is very different than what happens in Southern California. And what happens in Alaska is very different than what happens in Georgia. And so it really is important to understand the demographics, not just broadly, but in your community and the resources that are available. I don't know if you have any comments to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, take it as gentle as you possibly can, because I'm in the same position. I know Nicole and Jonathan, same. And I'm not accusing any of you, my pediatricians, of being neglectful at all either, but because the term was brought up by the question, I have never had I don't know, roughly 30 wellness visits with my kids, my 10-year-old, or 11-year-old, 6-year-old, now 3-year-old, and Emmy. I hadn't had a water safety, or do you swim? Are you aware that drowning is the #1 cause of death for this range? Not at one wellness visit. So I'm not trying to say that it's the pediatrician's fault by any stretch, but having that information and having the statistics be relevant, I think, is step one, and then making sure that we're being honestly fair and making sure that information is disseminated to all races and genders, and especially ones where you see a higher, really it should be everyone, period. There shouldn't be a focus on higher or lower. I think the information and getting that out there should be easy. I know it's not. I mean, I don't mean to say easy, but when you start with #1 thing for categorically this age group, it just seems really logical to start with #1 and then #2, and I know that's everyone's goal, really, is to prevent these things. So
I think in addressing inequities, we know that injury doesn't really discriminate socioeconomically, race, gender. We know that. If the AAP carries this flag and says we're going to put an end to this, the industry will follow. Much like with car seats. Does anyone have any trouble getting access to a car seat nowadays? I would imagine there was a time when they were expensive and people didn't have them. But when the society, the experts in child safety in our nation decide that car seats are a necessary tool, suddenly the industry exploded. Now everyone has access to a car seat. And I think the same will follow. So to answer your question, the way you get rid of the inequities is we decide as a nation that this is a problem, we're going to address it, and everyone will follow suit. I think what you'll see is instead of expensive swim lessons popping up at this institution, you'll see now there'll be a standardized process for training instructors VAs and other low-income available places. And it won't happen overnight, but I think that's how you address the inequities.
And several of the nonprofits, or most of them, really do have an emphasis on reaching that lower socioeconomic group and offering the swim lessons, the right kind of swim lessons that teach them children that water needs to be respected and water competency focus over just the fact that water is fun, but that are offering those and trying to really reach those kids. But I do think that's very important to make sure that we're aware of.
Separately than this group, obviously, but one of the things that we discussed a bunch is the insurance company's role in this. And we all know that everything from preventative medications to car seats to safe living habits or driving habits now are reflected in the amount you pay or your interaction with your insurance companies. And as soon as that shift happens, again, that happens through social pressure and policy change and things like that. But I think this is the beginning of that conversation that then spirals out to that level. Because if you get insurance companies realizing, look, our hospital bill that our insurance paid for was $128,000 for 33 hours in the hospital and the ambulance ride there. And I think there's a hard fiscal relationship that needs to be understood there, where they can say, look, this is in our best interest to help put up pool fences, to provide swim lessons, to cover this educational component. And once we get there, I think obviously we can really have an impact.
That's that whole spectrum, that multi-layered approach.
That was good.
And I want to thank you for asking that question, and I also want to acknowledge that I'm sitting here not being representative of the families that are dying in the majority from sleep-related deaths. I feel a huge responsibility to make sure that the racial and ethnic disparities are actually being addressed as I advocate for safe sleep across the country. But at the same time, knowing what might prevent me and my family from following those recommendations can be very different based off of the other races and ethnicities. And back to the conversation approach as far as understanding what the barriers are, I think is one of the critical things that might take, because it can be daunting to say we need to solve society's inequities. We need to solve that. But locally, how can you have an influence? It's understanding what those barriers are. For some, it may be some misperceptions about risk. For others, it may be because they're worried about their child being taken away, or they have an unstable home situation and they don't have a safe place to put their kid to sleep. And so having that being part of the conversation and having an overall cultural awareness, cultural intelligence about how you're addressing those visits, I think helps to take something that's very daunting and being part of a solution at the individual level.
Okay. Thanks. Carla?
Dr. Carla McKelvey, President of the Oregon Pediatrics Society. I thank you so much for sharing your stories. They're incredibly impactful, and I think it really will affect us in how we provide our counseling to our families. I have two questions. One is related to the book that you wrote about safe sleep. I was wondering if you had talked to Reach Out and Read. I participate in Reach Out and Read, and I can just think how helpful that might be to be able to hand that book out at either that first visit, which usually occurs within 1 week of life. And then the second question I have is, do you see a role for legislation related to pool safety?
Thank you for your question. And our foundation, Charlie's Kids Foundation, we're all volunteer nonprofit, and the approach that we have taken towards this book is to distribute it as about as low as cost as possible to get it as many babies' hands and families' hands as possible. And so we've been able and fortunate to partner with local pediatric offices all the way up to hospital systems, and in many states, entire state departments of health and hospital associations, and trying to get the books into families' hands. Most of the books are being distributed in delivery hospitals or during prenatal visits. Some of the books are being distributed in pediatric offices as well, and I think it is a really great adjunct to the Reach Out and Read program, which doesn't offer a book in the newborn visit. At least that's my understanding. We've had several conversations with them about trying to get it as part of their offerings, and it just unfortunately hasn't really come to fruition yet. But as we ultimately offer the book at a rate that's so much cheaper than what they would offer within their catalog, that we hope we can reach a lot of pediatricians through that mechanism. And I'll let you guys address the next question.
Do you guys want to start with the right?
Yeah, I think we've all talked about it, that as I talked about last time, there's these different layers and there's this spiral effect that legislation comes through after social pressure and when there's really defined data. And right now, one of the things that's lacking is this scientific evidence and the proven methods of how to move these things. And certainly pool fencing and that type of stuff, public pools, any of those areas, it makes sense to have the safety precaution stuff there. There's different layers of barriers, but we all see eventually, yes, legislation being passed, because it's no different than a car seat or any of these other things. They're very common and factual pieces of our lives. It just, we hadn't got there yet, and I think, to some degree, it takes the parents kind of spurring things on to actually, create the intensity that drives, the influence up the chain, because it really does have to come from the bottom. But once, we see that as likely that we'll be pushing legislation at some point.
And especially, I think when you say legislation, I think most people think of state level and federal level. But to be honest, the most effective mechanisms are through municipalities, because building codes and city councils and county commissions are actually a lot easier and more malleable in terms of working with them. And there are examples in Washington State, for example. Linda Kwan, whose name has been mentioned and will continue to be mentioned as sort of the queen of water safety, has been instrumental in getting actual state level legislation around pool fencing. I think it's the things that we have data for. It's about building the relationships, so we have a coalition of families and advocates and pediatricians, people who care about kids, and then moving that forward.
And I think legislation is kind of one piece
Yes.
of a multi-pronged approach,
Right.
because there's a not insignificant number of drowning deaths occurring in home toilets, in buckets of water. Our cousin drowned in a construction hole that was dug and filled with rainwater. So even making the pool safe, that's one prong of a multi-pronged approach. And it's hard to legislate, lids, toilet locks on your lids of your toilet, but that's where I think it's important that there's an advocate in the potential injured child's life.
And also for open water around life jacket, not just life jacket laws, but programs to support use of life jackets, whether it's loaners and that sort of stuff. Question over here. Thank you,
Yeah.
Carla.
Alex Svanovich, I'm Vice President of the New Mexico chapter. First of all, I'm incredibly grateful and indebted to you all for coming to speak with us. It was moving beyond words. I'm glad I've had an hour or so to recover so I could actually ask my question. But as a pediatrician, as a general pediatrician, I do have to cover a lot of topics, especially that age group 1 to 4. Parents often have a lot of questions about behavior, sleep, eating, etc. And I would love to hear from you. We talk about sound bites for media, but I would love a parent sound bite on drowning, because I live in a state where pools are maybe not that much of a problem in our state as much as drainage ditches, irrigation ditches, lakes, creeks, and I think that's probably true throughout the West. We have all kinds of sources. So I would love to hear what you guys think would be a soundbite for me to give to parents that would reach through all the other stuff that I have to talk about.
That's a lot of pressure.
Yes,
Right, that's a great
is.
question.
It's a great question. I think, we're seeing life through the lens, I see it now. You have to work big to small, and I don't want to invalidate other parents' concerns or the myriad of things that you guys have to cover during your visit. But I think one thing, and maybe I'm taking this from Bode's vocabulary, is before we get started, let me tell you the 3 things that are most likely to kill your child.
Yeah.
Nothing else is going to matter at this point on how many ounces of milk or whether they're exposed to peanuts. That's a 0. It's a nothing burger if you cremate them 2 weeks from now. So, soundbite-wise, that might be a little strong. But maybe you could say, and Bode might do this more eloquently, I understand you have concerns. There's 3 things I have to talk with you about in the next 3 minutes. These are them: drowning, SIDS, or sleep-related. When you come through and work big to small. And I think if someone had done that with us, we're all crazy. We all have questions maybe someone said, hang on, let's work big to small. Here's my thing. Now let's talk about your things. maybe that will, I don't say maybe, that will have an impact on child survival.
Yeah, and I can say my wife is, when she goes in there, she comes in with, she likes lists, right? So she has like several different lists of things that she wants to go over. And I think that the key would be either whether or not we get through a PSA that makes sense or it's just a soundbite from you, but that it's something that now that we've connected with other parents who've lost kids, it's like this, look, of all the things that we could have, done to prevent this or whatever, the one thing is like, with a pediatrician, if they'd just given us those statistics, we feel like, and of course it might not have changed anything because we've heard before that it goes in one ear and out the other ear sometimes, but if it's coming from a parent or if you say, I get it, I want to hear about the things that are concerning you, let me tell you about the 3 things statistically that are the most impactful. That word statistic, I think when you say that and then you connect it to a couple different tags, just very short and quick, I think has that impact. I think it's enough right there where you say, look, as you said, a little strong with saying like nothing else matters. Like, but all these other issues that you're concerned about are very important and we want to deal with those, but these are the most critical. You have to keep your child alive and water's the most dangerous thing. SID's the second most. So be very vigilant and be aware and think about these things and then let it trickle down. I know for my wife, that should have been the top of the list, and I think now it's there for her. Just knowing the statistics really moved it there, obviously, and she's having that impact on other parents, and it seems to resonate. I mean, other parents are like, they take it very seriously when it comes from a parent who has gone through it, and you say like, look, all this other stuff that we found out from our pediatrician, which was really good, useful information, and it was nice to have the conversation, these are the things that like we wish we'd heard.
And I think what they said is perfect. And combining it with, and I know you have a very limited amount of time, but combining it with a story somehow even, just that you break through that stigma that this is happening to real kids, real actual kids whose parents love them is really important. And they both hit the nail on the head, just, working big to small, but I'm also the parent with the list. And I think that, now with all the new infographics, like even just hanging those around the room. Because Bode said this one time, I know, like, you're there, you're walking around, I'm usually having a baby and bouncing a baby, while I'm waiting on the physician to come in. And so I'm looking at everything in there. And so then that could be a good way that if you don't bring it up, they could say, hey, I saw this over here about, teenagers, and I have a teenager, or I saw this over here about swimming, and can you tell me more about that? And so that can be one other way to have it be a conversation too, versus, kind of a lecture.
All right, so at the risk of inciting mutiny, I'm sorry, but we're not going to have time for the rest of the questions. I would be delighted if you want to email me. I would be delighted to get answers, and we'll figure out what we can do. I deeply appreciate that there were that many questions. I just need to make sure that we finish on time and that we get to what we need to talk about next. So please accept my apologies. So if I can have the slides back. So I knew that was going to be hard and difficult. I didn't know it was going to be that difficult. And I want to thank everybody for sharing that with us. And I can't thank these amazing people enough. One of the amazing things that happened as a result of tragedy, and I don't know if it was mentioned. Was it mentioned that Levi and Emmy both died on the same day? It was the same day. And Nicole and Bode's wife Morgan connected through social media. Nicole blogged, and Morgan is very active on social media. And they came together. And they built an alliance, and they kind of called us out, to be honest. And instead of retreating, instead of getting defensive, I'm really proud of what we were able to do. This issue became a priority for the leadership of the Academy, and by the leadership, I mean Mark Del Monte, the board, Susan Martin. And we promised the families that we would get a revised policy statement out in time for ALF as a mechanism for elevating the conversation. That policy statement is being released today. In this policy statement, we acknowledge that there has not been the level of data that we need, and there is a strong call out for a uniform, unified, consistent, moderated approach to how we develop information to be able to use our stock in trade, which is the scientific background. There's a tremendous need for that in the sleep-related death area as well. The key things that happen in this policy, the key changes, are a repeated emphasis on the layers of protection. From the individual, assigning a water watcher, things that we know can help, limiting access to water, whether it is a bucket, a toilet, a swimming pool. An increased emphasis on swimming lessons. There is still so much we don't know about swimming lessons. But we know that nothing is not acceptable. And there's an emphasis on thinking about not just the layers of protection for families and children, but the layers of intervention from us, from our individual practice to what we do at our systems level, to getting engaged in the broader community and at the policy level. The policy statement was authored by 7 people who, over the course of 2 months, took it from concept to execution, and it was led by Sarah Denny. The co-authors include Linda Kwan, who is the self-proclaimed and very well-earned queen of water safety. Tracy McCallan, who's a young physician from San Antonio, Texas. Shabana Youssef, who is an emergency room physician in Houston. Rohit Shenoy, you can hold the applause, we can do it at the end. Rohit Shenoy, who's also an emergency physician in Houston. Julie Gilchrist, who was formerly with the CDC. And then Jeff Weiss, who's from Phoenix, Arizona, who is the author of the previous policy statement. Now I want you to give them a round of applause. What they were able to accomplish in a short period of time, assisted by the incredible staff at AAP, all anchored by Mark Del Monte, making sure that this was going to happen. We cannot thank you enough. This is one piece. It starts with our policy because that becomes the gold standard. There is also released today, actually yesterday, at aap.org/drowning, a complete toolkit. This is a piece, a small piece, but a piece nonetheless, that you can take for your individual practice, for your chapter, for your health system. There's a bunch of stuff on here from the policy to other information, including infographics that were developed by Susan Martin and her incredible team here at the Academy that focus on different stages of risk for children, from new parents to children who are walking, to the curious toddler, to older children and the issue of swimming competence, to teens. Now I'm going to challenge you. The policy's out. Take a look at it. There will be a technical report coming in the very near future. It was paramount to get the policy statement out. The technical report, all the information is there. It just needs to be put together and made to look pretty. There's a toolkit. My challenge is this. You've heard the data. You've met the families, or at least a few families, and you've heard some stories. You have stories too. I challenge you to think about how you're going to transform your practice your community, to be a more effective advocate for kids, to help prevent them from the leading cause of death. We're here. Every member on the Council on Injury, Violence, and Poison Prevention would love nothing more than to help work with you, with your chapter, with your council committee section, to help do better things for kids. And with that plea and that offer, I again want to thank Mark. Where's Mark? Please, I need to do this. Please stand up. I have to embarrass you. Please. It is. And I need to do that for Susan Martin too, although she's going to hate me as well. Because none of this would have happened without them. It has been one of the greatest gifts of both my personal and professional life to have been engaged with these amazing people. And to think about the role of families going forward in how we do business in the academy, because their engagement in the development of policy is unprecedented. I've been involved in policy in the Injury Prevention Council for a long time. I've never seen this work in this way and be this effective before. We can, we must, we have to do better. I want to thank Bode and Nicole and Hughes and Sam and Greg for your courage, for your grace, for your time, for leaving your families to come and help us do better for kids. Thank you.
I'm not really sure if I'm allowed to do this, but I would also like to thank Dr. Hoffman, because I know he won't recognize himself, but he's been vital to all of this, and just as a person and as a physician. So